in this example, I want to go ahead and take a look at how I would get data from my client application, my JavaScript application, over to my server-side code. So I'm going to start with an empty HTML page, and I want to change this to HTML. So I'm going to start with an HTML page, and I'm going to title this Ajax with parameters. And I'm going to have a script source, Ajax with params.js. And what I want to do is I want the user to be prompted for their email address. Okay, so I'm going to have a div, and then inside the div I'll have a label for an email address, and then input field with an ID equal to email. And then eventually what I would do is I'd have a button, type equal to submit, create account. Okay, and I'll put a break in here. Okay, and I'm going to save this in my web server directory. I'm going to create a new folder called Ajax Params. And then the file name itself I'm going to call index.html. Okay, and the idea here is that if I go out to that page, so localhost Ajax Params index.html, I have this email address. I'm going to fill in an email address, and I'm going to create the account. But before I create the account, every time I leave this field, every time I leave this email text box, I want to validate, is it a valid email address? Okay, and the only way I can validate that it's a valid email address is I want to make sure it's unique based on my server-side code. Okay, and then what that'll do is it'll stop me from ever submitting this, or it'll at least give me information about, hey, you know, you're okay or you're not okay, based on whether this email address is unique. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and have my JavaScript file do that. So I'm going to set up a new file. It's going to be Ajax with params.js. I'm going to have an init method. So it's going to be some function definition. It's going to get triggered in the window.onload event. And the idea here is that I want that email field. So I'm going to get a reference to the email field. So I'm going to use document.querySelector, passing in a CSS selector for the email. So we're talking about that text field. And we're going to add an event listener for that email field that's listening for the onBlur event. So here's the blur event. And then I want it to trigger a method called validateEmail. Okay, so our validateEmail will be some function definition. And the idea here is that I want to go out to the server and say, is this unique? Okay, so I'm going to have some server-side code that basically says, is this email field, is that unique? Okay, and one thing I want to deal with is this validate email. I want to have a reference. So I don't want to necessarily have to go get the value again. So I could have an email field and then get the email fields.value. I could certainly do that. But this query selector is kind of a painful operation. I'm basically searching the HTML document. I say it's painful, meaning it's slow. It's painful for my code to execute. I don't need to do that in this case. What I can do is that email field is actually the control that's triggering this event. So I can have that field get passed in here. So the email field is going to get passed in. And then I can use, I'm sorry, the email is not going to get passed in. The event is going to get passed in. The event's going to get passed in. And then the email field will be equal to the event's current target. Okay, so now we have a reference to our email field and we can get the value out of there. So just a kind of proof of concept, we're going to take the email field and log the value. Okay, so we come back over to our code. We want to bring up the developer tools, so we're inspecting, we're looking at the console. I type in an email address and I tab out of here, which is going to trigger the onBlur event, and you'll notice that it's logging my email address that's there. If I use my Madison College email address and I tab out of there, you'll see that's there. If I use abc@123.com and tab out of there, so I'm grabbing that email value. Okay, so this is kind of the starting point for our application. What we want to do is we want to take this information, so we want to take this user entered value, we want to send it over to the server every time the user leaves that field. So on blur, we want to send it over to the server so that the server can check before we ever try to create the account. The server can check to see, is it okay? Like, is this email address already in use, or is it okay, it's unique and it's fine to use? So instead of writing actual server-side code to do this, we're going to just have a script, email.php. So we go ahead and save it. Normally what we do is we do something like select count star from users where email is equal to the email address that was passed in. So question mark as kind of a parameter. That would be kind of our normal query, and then we say, you know, is that count equal to 0 or is it equal to 1 to indicate is it unique or not unique. But I don't want to handle all that database code. I don't want to deal with this server-side code in PHP because it's going to be different whether we're dealing with PHP or Ruby or .NET or Java. So I don't necessarily care about this server-side code. So I'm going to simplify this process, and I'm just going to check, is it unique across a couple of email addresses? So I'm going to have some kind of conditional saying, is that user entered email equal to, let's use bgates@hotmail.com or sjobs@mac.com or jeff@amazon.com. Okay, so if it's that, then we know it's invalid. It's already in use. Otherwise, we're going to say it's valid. Okay? That's the idea here. So I need a variable that's going to store whatever the user entered in this text box, and I need a variable that's going to reference that over here in my server-side code. Okay, so I want that user entered email. So I want a variable called user entered email, and I'm going to arbitrarily pick a value or a variable name. The way I'm going to access the variable is I'm going to access it assuming that it was passed to the server-side code via an HTTP GET. So I'm going to go to the PHP superglobal array. It's passed via an HTTP GET, and then I'm arbitrarily using the variable name z. And it's a terrible variable name, but I want to show you how arbitrary it is. Okay, so I go grab the user entered email, and I'm expecting a parameter named z. And now I'm going to say if the user entered email is equal to bgates@hotmail.com, or if that user entered email is equal to sjobs@mac.com, or the user entered email is equal to jeff@amazon.com, then we know it's invalid, otherwise we know it's valid. Okay, so we want to echo something out conditionally. We want to echo out, you know, either this is valid or not valid. Okay, so I'm going to have a variable called isValid, and by default I'm going to think that the email address is valid. I'm going to say that it's true. However, if it's one of those other three emails, then I'm going to flip the flag on isValid from true to false. If it's valid, that was the default, so I don't have to do anything here. And then we're going to echo out the result of that isValid variable. Okay, so if I want to check this, I'm going to go to email.php, and I have to pass in parameter for the value z. So this server-side code is looking for a query string parameter named z. So I'm going to say z is equal to bill@microsoft.com. Okay, you'll notice that I get that it is valid, true, it's 1. However, if I do bgates@hotmail.com, then I get nothing. Nothing is not a good answer. So I want this to return either 0 or 1, right? So is valid to return 0 or 1. Here's the problem with PHP. This is a unique thing to PHP. If I echo out true, it echoes out 1. If I echo out false, it echoes out an empty string, not 0, okay, which is crazy to me. So what I want to do is, maybe I want to convert this to a 0 or 1. So by default it's 1 or 0, and then I'm going to echo it out. So now you'll see that when I echo it out I get 0, but if I enter out a valid email address, so instead of Hotmail I use MSN, then it's valid. So my server-side code is going to give me the answer, either 0 or 1, and life is good. The other thing that I'm going to do is, and it's fairly easy to fall into this trap, I have a conditional, so if it's one of these 3 emails, then I have to flip that flag, so from true to false, but I'm not doing anything in the else condition, then get rid of it. Okay, so just good programming practice. I'm not doing anything in that else conditional, so it's gone. So this is my server-side code, and I want to interact with it. So again, kind of the point of this was, if I go back to my HTML file, the user enters their email address, and I want to validate it against a list of known problematic email addresses, and that's where my server-side code comes in. So I come back over to my JavaScript file, and where I validate the email address, I have the email field.value, I can log it, but what I want to do is I want to interact with my server-side code. So again, I'm going to have this XHR object, so XMLHttpRequest. I know that I want to interact with a particular URL, so I'm going to have a URL equal to email.php. And I know that I'm going to have some parameters. Specifically, I know that my server-side code is expecting a parameter named z, and obviously a bad name, but that's fine. So I'm going to have a variable called params equal to question mark to start the query string, z equal to, and then I can concatenate the value, so email field.value. And to be more modern about this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a string template. So I put those backticks around it, and since I put the backticks around it, I have to interpolate that value. Okay, so these are my params. And then, just like I do with other XML HTTP request objects, I have to open it. I'm going to open it via an HTTP GET. So I'm going to open it to the URL plus the parameters, and then I'm going to send the request. Okay, this should show us enough to kind of get started. So I come back over to my HTML page. I want to look at the network traffic, and I really don't care about the HTML or JavaScript, so I'll clear those out. Let's assume that I enter bgates@hotmail.com. It's an invalid email address. So as soon as I leave, that's when the network traffic is going to come into play. So I'm going to tab out of the field. And my network traffic should have gotten triggered there, and it didn't, and I'm not sure why. It looks like I have 2 errors now, so let's go look at our console. And it looks like XML HTTP request used the new, so I need a new XML HTTP request. Try that again, bgates@hotmail.com. I tab out of that field, and if I look at my network traffic, now I'm seeing the network traffic showing that I'm requesting that information. So here it is again. You can see that my URL, and I have to make this a little bigger so that we can actually see the data. you can see how I'm passing z's equal to, and then I have that %20 plus %20 bgates at hotmail.com. And if I look at the response, it tells me, yeah, that's fine. Even though this is supposed to be a problematic email. And I'll be honest with you, if I'm not looking at these developer tools, I have a bug in this that's really hard to track down. And the bug being, you can see how I have space, that %20 that shows up in the URL is a space character, and it looks like there's actually 2 space characters. I don't want those space characters there. The space characters are going to cause me to have an improper evaluation of whether these things are equal or not. I don't want the space characters there, and where they're coming from is I have a space before the plus, and I have a space after the plus. And in fact, I'm not doing concatenation, so I just had a literal syntax error there as well. So all of those things are going to go away. So now I come back over, I refresh the page, and I type in bgates@msn.com. And you can see the network traffic as I leave this field. And you'll notice that I'm passing in the variable z, the user entered value from that text box. Now it tells me, yep, that's okay, because I'm using MSN. If I try the same thing, but now use Hotmail, which is one of my problematic email addresses, you'll notice that I'm passing the Hotmail address, and you can see the response is telling me, no, that is not okay. That's not an acceptable email address. Okay, so I'm getting my server-side data. I have to interact with that server-side data. So again, I have to define my callback. So I'm going to have an onReadyStateChange event. It's going to be equal to some function definition. I'm going to check if the ready state is equal to 4, meaning I actually have the response back where I need it. Then I'm going to do a follow-up check to see, if that xhr.response text is 0 or 1. So I only care if it's 0. I want to actually just change the background or the border of this text field to be red. So I'm going to take that email field and I'm going to change the style, border, color to red. But I only want to do that if the xhr.response text is equal to 0. So if I found out there's a problem. Okay, so if I go ahead and run this, I type in bgates@hotmail.com, it's a problem, and I tab out of there, you'll notice the border color changes to red, indicating there's some problem. I'd probably want to give the user a message as well. I might want to use Bootstrap and set a class saying, hey, there's a problem here. But in our case, all we're doing is changing the border color to red. So I say, oh, that's a problem. Let me go ahead and change it from Hotmail to MSN. And you'll notice when I tab, now the email address is just fine, but you'll notice the border color didn't change back. And that's because I didn't code it to change back. I need an else condition here saying if the response text is 1, so if it's non-zero, then the style border color will just equal that empty string to change it back. So again, kind of going through that progression again, I go bgates@hotmail.com, which is problematic. When I tab out of here, it turns red. So I go back and I decide, oh, I don't need Hotmail. I'll use MSN. And now you'll notice that it's telling me it's okay. So the key takeaway here is I have to be able to send data over to the server, and the way I'm going to do that is by passing parameters as key value pairs. And right now our key value pair that we're sending over to the server is Z. Our server receives it as Z and does its processing. It's a terrible variable name. So it's a terrible key value pair name. So instead of using Z, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to email address. Okay, so the parameter that I'm sending over to the server is email address. Then my server-side code has to accept the parameter email address. Okay, I intentionally use the variable name Z to show you that it's arbitrary what I call it here. However, my JavaScript code and my server-side code have to be in sync. Whatever I call that variable in my JavaScript code, I have to call it the same thing in my server-side code and vice versa. Okay, so I do want that to be the case. One additional thought with this parameter thing is, what if I have more than just an email address? Like, what if I wanted to send an ID over, or maybe a college, to indicate, you can have a duplicate ID, but it has to be unique at a particular college. So I ask you to enter your email and a college, and then I look, is that email address unique for this particular college? So I have more than one parameter. I'm not going to ask the user to enter a college. I just want to show you how to deal with multiple parameters. So right now we have our variable called params. It's equal to this question mark, email address equal to the user entered value. And then I'm going to use an ampersand character and say that the college is equal to MATC. Okay, and the idea here is that I would be sending multiple parameters to the server. So if I enter an email address, you can look at my network traffic, and if I expand this out, we can see that both of those parameters are available. And then my server-side code could then get the college by saying, hey, what's the college? I'm just going to go to the HTTP GET parameters and ask what the college is. Okay, and then I would obviously have some additional logic in my server-side code to verify, hey, this email address is unique for this particular college. But the takeaway from this video is, how do I actually send data from my client application, from my JavaScript application, over to my server-side code so that my server-side code has access to that data? Okay, and the way we do that is with these query string parameters. Okay.